So today, guys, we're going to learn about sonnets. Raise your hands if you guys have heard of sonnets before. Yeah? What do you know about sonnets?
It's a poem.
It is a poem. That's it? That's all we've learned about sonnets? We know it's a poem? Do you guys remember how many lines are in a sonnet? There's a specific number of lines that have to be in a sonnet. 4? No. Good guess.
5.
No. These are all really good guesses, but we're not there yet. Should I just tell you?
Yes.
14. You guys ever heard of that before? 14 lines in a sonnet?
No.
No? Alright, well, we're going to learn a lot about sonnets today, apparently. We do know it's a poem, so that's a good kickstart here, alright? So a couple things I want you to write down. First, about the sonnet form. It's got 14 lines, okay? So that's the first thing you need to know. Anytime you see a poem that has 14 lines, it's not automatically a sonnet, but you can probably assume that it could be a sonnet. But there's a couple other ways that you can tell if a poem is a sonnet too. Alright? It must be written in iambic pentameter. Raise your hand if you read Romeo and Juliet when you were a freshman. Okay. Did you guys read Midsummer Night's Dream as a sophomore? Okay. So you've done some Shakespeare. Shakespeare's plays are written in iambic pentameter. Do you guys remember learning anything about them? No, nothing stuck for these things. All right. Well, we'll come back to iambic pentameter in a second. Next, it's got to have a specific rhyme scheme. All right. Certain lines are going to rhyme with other lines in a sonnet. And we'll talk in a second about which lines will rhyme with which lines. Okay. It can be about any subject. All right. You can write a sonnet about just about anything that you want to, but most often they're about nature or love. Okay. So guys, if you're trying to impress your lady, a sonnet is a good way to do that. All right. Ladies, you nudge the guys to do that for you. Has anybody ever received a poem from a guy or a girl?
Yeah.
Do people not do that anymore? You have? Okay. Man, chivalry is dead apparently. Alright. Finally, a sonnet introduces a problem sometimes. Or it asks a question in the beginning, and then a resolution is offered after the turn. When I use the word turn, a turn is just a shift in tone in a poem, okay? You can have a turn in any kind of poem. It doesn't have to be a sonnet, but typically a sonnet will have a turn in it where the tone of the poem suddenly shifts at some point from whatever to whatever. You know, you can fill in those adjectives for whatever describes the tone of that piece, okay? So all of these things have to be present for it to be considered a sonnet. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
All right. Iambic pentameter. You guys said you didn't remember anything about that, so I want to tell you a little bit about iambic pentameter. A line of iambic pentameter is a line with 10 beats or 10 syllables. Okay? You know, you can count syllables. Mr. Coomes, how many syllables is that? 2, okay? So a line of iambic pentameter, it's going to have 10 syllables in it, right? Or 10 beats. So that's one way to tell if it's written in iambic pentameter. If you go back and look at Romeo and Juliet, or if you go back and look at A Midsummer Night's Dream that you guys read earlier in your high school career, when you look at each line, you're going to notice that just about every single line in his plays had 10 syllables. And you guys remember how long those plays were? Okay, so imagine writing that and, you know what I mean, making sure that, you know, there's 10 syllables in every single line. That's one of the reasons why Shakespeare is so popular, but also why it's so great and we continue reading today. Not that he just wrote 37 plays in iambic pentameter, okay? But they're about subjects that we can relate to, you know? So, a sonnet is only 14 lines with iambic pentameter, but that's just kind of interesting to kind of think back to those plays that you read that were so long, 5 acts, and they were all written in iambic pentameter as well. And I am is 2 beats or 1 foot, okay? So if an I am is 2 beats and there are 10 beats in a line, how many I ams are in one line? 5, okay? So penta is 5, or a line that has 5 feet. And that's why it's called iambic pentameter, okay? Because an I am has 2 beats. There's 5 of them, okay? So it's called iambic pentameter. That's where it gets its name. It's taking those little pieces and putting them together to form those words. Meter is just the rhythm of a poem, okay? That's why iambic pentameter, all these little things coming together to form that. And then a foot is made of an unstressed syllable and a stressed syllable in that order, okay? So an iambic pentameter, you've got unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, all the way through for 10 beats. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? What's that from? Romeo and Juliet, okay? If you go back to Shakespeare, that's what that means. But soft, what light through yonder window break? Okay, you can take that line, break it down into 10 syllables, and that's where you get iambic pentameter. And you can do that with each line of a sonnet as well, okay? Who's confused? Everybody with me?
Yes.
All heads nodding yes. Good deal. Good deal. All right. There are two types of sonnets, and that's what we're going to talk about. There's an English sonnet, and then there's an Italian sonnet. And I want you to be able to recognize the difference between those two. Okay. If you were to open up a textbook like we are in a second, and I show you a sonnet, can you tell me if it's an English sonnet or an Italian sonnet? Okay. So English sonnets. This is how you tell. An English sonnet is also called a Shakespearean sonnet. All right. Shakespeare, who wrote those plays, he also wrote a ton of sonnets. He wrote so many that they have renamed the English sonnet Shakespearean sonnet. So if you see it written this way, those are the same thing. English sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet, exact same thing. Next, it includes 3 quatrains. Quatrains are a group of 4 lines. You were talking about 4 lines earlier in a poem. That's called a quatrain, okay? And a couplet, which is 2 lines. All right? Add those up. 3 times 4 is 12. Plus 2 is 14. That's where you get the 14 lines for this one. The rhyme scheme is often AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG. Does this make sense? You guys remember writing these at the end of poems sometimes to see which lines rhyme with which lines? So the first line is going to rhyme with the third line, and the second line is going to rhyme with the fourth line, and the fifth line is going to rhyme with the seventh line. So all those letters, those are the lines that rhyme, okay? So that's typically your rhyme scheme for an English sonnet. So one quick way to tell if you're looking at an English sonnet is just look at the last word of each line and see which lines rhyme with what, okay? And if it's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, then you know it's an English sonnet, okay? Finally, the turn is typically after the 12th line. What's the turn?
The shift, tone shift.
All right, the shift in the tone, okay? So typically the first 12 lines, these 3 quatrains will be 1 tone, all right? And then your couplet, or following the last 2 lines, will be a different tone. And that's where that turn happens, and that's why it's called a shift, okay? Everybody with me? All right, what's the other type of sonnet besides the English sonnet? Italian sonnet, all right? An Italian sonnet, also called a Petrarchan, that's what the word is really hard for me to say. A Petrarchan sonnet, named after the Italian poet Petrarch. Okay, so sometimes it's almost always called Italian sonnet, but in case you see Petrarchan sonnet, that's the same thing too. It includes an octave, which is 8 lines, and a sestet, which is 6 lines. Okay, you kind of see these octagon, 8, and a sestet is 6 lines. Still, 8 and 6 add up to 14, so it's still a 14-line poem. The rhyme scheme must begin with A, B, B, A, B, B, A, B, B, A, and then can conclude with any variation of C, D, and E. Sometimes it's C, D, E, C, D, E, C, D, C, D, E, E. Could be any variation of those, okay? But the first 8 lines are always going to be A, B, B, A, B, B, A. So, like I said, a very quick and easy way to tell the difference between an English sonnet and an Italian sonnet. Without even reading the whole poem, you can just look at the last word in each line and see what rhymes, okay? If the second and the third, and then the 6th and the 7th line all rhyme, those are all B's, then you know that you've got an Italian sonnet. Finally, the turn occurs between the octave and the sestet. So after those 8 lines, you've got a shift in your tone for the last 6 lines, okay? So let's practice this. Underneath your desk, you've got a textbook. I want you to pull that out. And what we're going to look at whenever I tell you which page you're going to turn to is the grouping of the lines. How many lines are in each group? Do you have a sestet and an octave, or do you have the quatrains? Okay. What is your rhyme scheme? Look at the last word in each line. Where is the turn? Don't really worry about this because we're not going to read through this whole poem, but if we were reading the whole poem, you could look to see where the turn is. based on your answers, what kind of sonnet is it? That's how you can determine, is it an English sonnet or is it an Italian sonnet, all right? All right, what I want you to look at is page 807. There's a poem on that page by Wordsworth called "The World is Too Much With Us." See if you can determine if this is an English sonnet or an Italian sonnet. Raise your hand when you got it figured out. I see 2 hands, 3 hands, 4 hands, 5. Remember what you're looking for, okay? Rhyme scheme. Does it have quatrains and a couplet, or an octave and a sestet? On the count of 3, we're all gonna say it, and let's see if we all say the same thing, okay? 1, 2, 3.
Italian.
I didn't hear anybody say English. It is Italian. This is an Italian sonnet, all right? You guys were like questioning that though, like Italian? All right, try one more. Take a look at page 330. This one is called Sonnet 130 by William Shakespeare. Raise your hand when you got it. I'm on count to 3. We're all going to say it in unison. 1, 2, 3.
English.
English. What's a dead giveaway that this is an English sonnet? You got the rhyme scheme. It's by William Shakespeare. What did I say? English sonnets are also called
Shakespearean.
Shakespearean sonnets. If you see any sonnet by William Shakespeare, you don't have to look at the rhyme scheme, all right? It's a Shakespearean sonnet. It's an English sonnet. Okay. All of his sonnets have the exact same rhyme scheme, all right? But just in case, it's always good to check too. All right. Everybody cool with that? Can everybody tell me the difference between an Italian sonnet and an English sonnet?
Yes.
End of lesson. Good job. Congratulations.